Okay, welcome everyone to this Centre for Voluntary Sector Leadership session, Issues Made to Matter, Ethics and Leadership in the Voluntary Sector. Sorry about the slightly delayed start. We're just waiting for some more people, and it might be that people join as well while we're underway, but we've cleverly built that into the timetable, so it shouldn't make us any later. Okay, so it falls to me to do the welcome introduction. So if we move on to the next slide and then quickly to the next one, you can see me. My name is Daniel Haslam. I'm a lecturer in the business school at the Open University, and very closely connected with the Centre for Voluntary Sector Leadership. And we're really pleased to be joined as well today by Dr. Nick Winchester, who's the head of the Department for Public Leadership and Social Enterprise and a senior lecturer in the business school, and also has been involved with CVSL for quite a while, since its inception. And we're really happy that Nick could join us to deliver this session today. I'm going to just do a few quick introductions and housekeeping, things like that. So Nick, if we could move on, please. Okay, quick note about recording. You will have all seen on the invitation emails that there's an option to join the session anonymously if you want to, and that's still an option. If people want to sign out and sign back in again, you can do that by just joining the session on an anonymous window in your browser. So that's an option. And the reason we gave that option really is because issues of ethics and indeed leadership as well can bring up sensitive topics. And we just want it to be a comfortable space for people to be able to discuss those things without feeling like it's going to be exposed anywhere. On that point, we are going to host the recording with some additional materials on the CVSL website in the future, but we're not going to do that. We're not going to put that up for at least a week, because we want to go back and look at what's spoken about and review it, just to make sure there's nothing particularly controversial or sensitive in that. And also we want to give you as attendees a bit of time to, if you make a contribution, to reflect on that and just get in touch with us if you think there's anything that you don't want putting out there into the wider world. So we're giving you a week for that. So it'll be next Friday, so the 18th of December, until we look at putting that up onto our website. But yeah, so that's what the plan is. On that point, we really want the session to be as interactive as possible. So we're going to be using Nick's going to be using, should I say, a variety of polls. We're going to use Padlet. I don't know if people have used that before, but more on that later when we get to the correct point. And we have time for a Q&A at the end. So there's opportunity for you to raise any questions as we go through. The chat box is available. We're going to hopefully use that more to give you the links to the polls and the Padlet, etc. But it is available for you to put things in if you like. But we'd prefer it if you could put your contributions on the Padlet, because it's a bit easy to keep track of. The chat box can scroll quite quickly, especially if we've got quite a few people in the session as we have today. And then another quick note, just to remember to mute yourselves. I'm sure we've all been on meetings and sessions where you've got the background noise of the dog barking or deliveries or kids coming in or whatever it might be. So if you could, that would be great. Thanks. Okay, next slide. So a little bit about the Centre for Voluntary Sector Leadership before we get cracking. We were established in 2016 thanks to a philanthropic gift from a gentleman called Anthony Nutt to the university. And our focus is on small and medium-sized voluntary sector organisations. And we really emphasise the link between the voluntary sector in practice, research, and then the teaching and learning that we do at CVSL and more widely at the Open University. And for more information generally, it's a great idea to visit our website. We will have a nicely refreshed new version that will be hopefully up the start of next week. So we're trying to tie the launch of the new website into putting the materials from this session up there. So it'll be really nice to do that. So go and have a look. One of the key outputs from the centre over the last few years, though, has been our leadership courses. And I'm just going to talk a little bit about those, because they've really sort of been the inspiration for running this session. So yeah, next slide. So we have two main leadership courses that have developed, and both of them are available on the university's Open Learn platform, which is a great platform. It's got loads of free learning courses on there on a massive range of different topics, and two of which are ours. And we also have lots of other courses on there that are specifically related to the voluntary sector, including one that we developed with Volunteer Scotland around working with volunteers. And yeah, so a great place to visit, both for our courses, but more widely as well for free learning from the Open University. And these courses, leadership and ethics forms part of these courses, particularly the first one, developing leadership practices in voluntary organisations. That's more of a sort of general introductory course in which ethics forms a part, and people who have taken those courses, of which I know there are a few who are on the call today, which is great, will recognise Nick from those, because he very kindly contributed some sections on ethics and leadership in those courses. The second course, Collaborative Leadership in Voluntary Organisations, focuses very much on the collaborative approach to leadership and goes into a bit more detail about those specific approaches. So both have been really well received by people who have taken them, wider communities, and particularly we've had a lot of interest in what we call our leadership learning clubs, which have facilitated approaches to going through the courses with groups of people. And again, I know we've got some people on the call today who've taken part in those. So they've been really good, and they've really helped to foster this growing community of voluntary sector employees, volunteers, and just people who are interested in the voluntary sector and leadership, and really foster that idea of developing leadership practices in the voluntary sector as a whole. So today we see as an opportunity to go a bit further with some of the things that are discussed in the course, but also for people who are brand new, who haven't thought about this topic before, it's an opportunity to sort of dip your toes in the water, and then maybe follow up with the courses and hopefully develop that community and get things rolling from that point of view. So next slide, please, Nick. So without further ado, I'll hand over to Nick. I should say, firstly, thanks very much for controlling the slides for my section, Nick, but Nick will be your host for the rest of the session, and I'll just chip in every now and then. So over to you, Nick.
Okay, thanks very much, Daniel. Hope everyone can hear me. It's a pleasure that you all came. In this workshop, what we want to do really is kind of surface issues around kind of ethics and leadership. So I've got a series of kind of opening comments I want to make to sort of contextualize this discussion. Then I want to explore some issues using a particular scenario, and we're going to use a quiz in order to capture some of our thoughts in it. Then we're going to surface some challenges in your practice, and then thinking about going back to the theme here of how to make ethics matter. Just go back to me for a moment. My field is business ethics, and I see it as a kind of very broad engagement with looking at the kind of normative, ethical and moral questions that arise in the kind of interrelationship between organisations and society. Sometimes it's about very broad issues about perhaps the structure of capitalism. Sometimes it's about very micro issues about the relationship between people, perhaps in a leadership context. I'm not an expert in the voluntary sector, although I've been working with CVSL for since its inception. If I'm making mistakes, please catch me, and that's fine. I'm also looking to learn from you about the kind of ethics issues and practices in your space. Now, in these kind of sessions, and I've done sessions like this before, I sometimes get described as an ethics expert. This means I do a lot of research on ethics. I'm not going to claim to be a perfect ethical being. I'm as flawed as everyone else, nor am I going to sit here and give you a sermon. And indeed, what I want to emphasize perhaps today is thinking about, and it's my final point in this opening comment slide, as ethics as a kind of collective inquiry, both in organisations, across people. So having said that, I want to kind of situate this discussion a bit. If I think particularly about the UK context, austerity has hit hard in terms of perhaps the income coming to the voluntary sector, but also the roles it's taken on from the state sort of passing off some of its traditional roles to other sectors. And then if we add to it the pandemic, we see kind of intensification of this problem. We know that the impact of the pandemic is asymmetrically distributed amongst particular communities. And we also know there's massively increased need, and this is in the context of a significant reduction in income. So that puts the sector, I imagine, in a kind of crisis footing. The need for action, the need to do stuff, and probably you may find it difficult to find the time in what you're doing because you're so busy. Well, why? That might generate issues. We often think of ethics as a reflective activity. as something that we do when we pause, when we think about the situation in the round. And sometimes when we're in this kind of bias for action and we're in this kind of space of doing, that ethics sometimes doesn't have the space to kind of breathe. And what I want to do is kind of make the case to you that actually you need to recognize that, and you need to find spaces to get ethics on the table, to think about it, find those moments of reflection. And secondly, I'm a manager and I speak to the people I line manage regularly. The context has generated increasing demands for work, increasing stress. People feel tired, exhausted, anxious. There are emotions floating around that are sometimes quite uncomfortable. And what I also want to say in this is talk about how these ethics that reverberate around organisations and between people are important when we think about how we treat them, and that is part of our ethical life. Now, I've used the phrase leadership and ethics in the beginning here. There is work in the field of what's called leadership ethics, and that often talks about when one is a person, becomes a leader, one takes on a certain role, and with it comes a certain kind of ethic with it, about being a moral manager, being an ethical person, doing, as you say, being a person of integrity. I don't want to dismiss that, but I want to take a certain different tack, which is thinking about how ethics sort of reverberates around leadership, and see these kind of as practices that commingle, that interrelate. And we can do that from a really good space. Say if we were having a workshop here on collateralized debt obligations, we'd probably start from a fairly low base, and we'd have to think of what they are. We'd have to talk about technical issues, but actually we all come here as quite sophisticated, in fact very sophisticated ethical beings. We've been brought up in contexts. We've got notions of the good, of the right, fairness, of respect, that form part of our life project, and probably some of the reasons why we work in the organisations we do. So that's a really powerful place to start. And I don't like the idea that when we come to leadership, we kind of leave that narrative behind. Actually, the narrative of ethics kind of lacerates it. We bring through our life projects, and it's being draw that through into our leadership practice. I think is quite a powerful way of thinking it. There's another point I want to express. Often when we think about ethics, we think about proscription. We think about things we don't do, we should not do. If you ask people to give you an ethical example, say something like, you should not kill. There's an older tradition about thinking about ethics. If you go back to the ancient Greeks and we go back to Aristotle, we're thinking about ethics as flourishing. Thinking about human flourishing, and Aristotle was particularly talking about individuals, but about forming and enacting notions of the good life and human flourishing. And we can extend that to think about the context when we operate. We can think about environmental issues, think about climate change. So when we talk about ethics and leadership practice and start thinking about things that are difficult, things that are challenging, things that are uncomfortable, we need to keep in mind this notion, a concomitant notion of ethics as flourishing, and a really positive view. Again, you may work in the organisation, you may have chosen to work in this sector because you think it contributes to the good life. So let's keep that in mind. Issues of flourishing often get put down, but let's always keep that in mind as part of ethics, as a kind of really energising, something that drives us. In the module we talked about ethics as leadership, this kind of positive energy that might accompany it. Just a quick note on terms. I'm going to use the terms ethics and morality interchangeably, and there's a kind of philosophical basis in that I don't intend to go to. I really want to avoid technical language in this context. What I'm saying is we're operating in the space about right and wrong, good and bad, judgment, fairness, equity, equality, rights. So we're operating in that kind of space. I don't think terminological issues are going to help us, all that. So we're operating in that space, and I'm going to say ethics and morality, they're kind of different routes. I don't mind which term we use, and I might slip and slide between them. And to finish this point, and this is why we're trying to create a kind of interactive space for us, is that very much the approach I'm taking, see ethics as a collective inquiry. Just a moment, so after this, we do this session, and we will send you a copy of the slides, so you don't have to take notes in that respect. And the slides also have further references which you might want to draw and follow up, but I'm not going to discuss here. So that's my opening comments, and I hope you found them kind of interesting, hopefully a little bit provocative, and maybe a way of thinking about ethics that perhaps you might not have explored in more detail, but probably hopefully rings true in some degree. However, this is quite abstract. I want to bring it kind of down to earth, and one way to do that is for us to explore a scenario together, and we're going to do it using a quiz. I'll ask Daniel to put a link when I want to kind of release the quiz, but we're using this technology. We had a lot more people than we're expecting, and that's fantastic. So we're trying to use technologies so that we can capture some kind of interactivity, and given the number of people, having everyone speaking mean kind of very little room for conversation. So the scenario I want to put us into place. Let's think ourselves into it. I want to put us all in the position, say as an individual leader within Comic Relief, and you're about to make a decision, a key decision in Comic Relief's time. Well, recently Comic Relief said they will stop sending celebrities to Africa, and in particular kind of white celebrities. And the picture of Stacey Dooley was kind of everywhere on the news. This is from the BBC. It's particularly in the context of the Black Lives Matter movement and the key issues that it's raised, that Comic Relief said that sending celebrities can be quite problematic. Sending them to Africa, and I use Africa in a way to understand Africa as some kind of undifferentiated space that just experiences poverty. That in sending white celebrities, we might be in danger of creating a white saviour narrative. And also about the respect for the people we're speaking on behalf, and that it's important not to mediate it through celebrities, but actually hear people and get them to enunciate their own experiences. So one can see this as a kind of key decision that is really centred about the ethics and practice of this organisation. So I want you to feel your way in. Think about, you're sitting there, you're about to make the decision, you're going to sign off an announcement, it's going to go out to the press. And it's a bit artificial, just say you're the kind of individual leader who takes all the decisions. What I want to ask you is just think about the scenario. Imaginative identification is a good practice in ethics. One might see it as an ethical practice. And I'm going to ask you a slightly unfair question. The first question is going to be, is this the right thing to do? Simple yes or no. And then from your perspective, so if you said yes, follow the next questions from yes. If you said no, from the question of no, you've taken that decision. And the second question is a scale talking to you about how confident are you is the right answer. So you stood in front of the world's press and you would say, if you gave a 10, you are utterly confident this is the most rational decision anyone's ever made. And 1, if you have no confidence in the decision of yes or no you've made. And question 3 is related, but it's asking you how comfortable you are. Is there a bit of unease? Sort of think your way in. If you got 1, you've got no ease at all, and you're jumpy, you're kind of moving. 10, you're utterly at ease, or you might be kind of horizontal. It's so relaxing. This is the most wonderful decision made. I can relax into it. And this scenario for a bit. So imagine you're just about to make the announcement. You've signed off the press release. Well, you're just about to sign off the press release. You get a knock on your door, and in walks the CFO of Comic Relief. I should just mention, this is now a totally fictional scenario. I have no idea what went on in there, but I'm just using for for a sort of pedagogic end. So the CFO walks in and says, okay, you're about to make a decision, but there's something important I need to tell you. We've been looking at the kind of psychology of giving. We've employed all these behavioural psychologists. We've got some economists out there, and we've done some modelling. I need to tell you something quite difficult. There's a couple of things. Firstly, if you make the announcement, it's going to be heavily discussed in terms of the kind of Black Lives Matter movement. And there are a number of people who find this problematic. There are a number of people who would say, to use an old phrase, this is political correctness gone mad, and there's nothing wrong with sending these celebrities. And they simply won't watch our appeals, they won't watch our programme. The second point is, we've looked at the psychologists and we've said, well, actually, people really like these stories. They kind of see these celebrities as something they can relate to. And seeing a celebrity experiencing kind of real emotions in that context brings it home to them. To put it bluntly, you know, this means they're likely to give more money to respond. If we don't have the celebrities, people won't have the same emotional response. So before you take that decision, you'll lose 50 million donations. And we're 95% sure of that. This will happen. So before you make the announcement, we need a list of cuts. So I've drawn one for you. These are the things we're not going to do. These are the things we're not going to fund, and these are the people we will no longer employ. So you've been given a lot more information there. Now, Daniel, could you kind of release quiz 2? So now think about the scenario. Now you've got that information, and I'm going to ask you exactly the same questions. Is this the right thing to do? Yes or no? And then from that perspective, think about how confident you are this is the right thing to do. You know, from no confidence to so confidence it's frightening. And the third question is think about your kind of comfort. Think about whether it gives you that sense of ease, or are you feeling a bit uneasy kind of about the decision. So once again, I'll give you a couple more minutes. If you didn't answer the first quiz, feel free to answer the second quiz. But what I want to do is, once we've done that, is then actually take a look at what we've answered in the round and just kind of raise some issues here. And as you answer the quiz, just think about whether changing the scenario altered your perspective in some way. Perhaps not in terms of whether it's right or wrong, but issues about confidence and comfort might come to the fore here. It's always kind of interesting when you set these kind of tests, because I'm expecting certain kind of answers, but I don't really know what you're going to say, and I'm kind of framing it in a way. So let's have a look at the first one. Well, we kind of have an overwhelming majority in the first quiz. 82% says yes, 17.4% says no. Let's just compare our views with the second quiz, where I introduced kind of more information. Well, we still see a majority of yeses, but the no's have come up quite considerably. And that's just by kind of introducing kind of information that may be kind of implicit. Now let's have a look at the confidence and the comfort. I'm not going to have to do addition on the fly, but let's have a look. Fairly kind of highest confidence, and I think we can see the kind of confidence kind of sliding down. And comfortable, that's for quiz 1, and that's for quiz 2. Not sure quite how to read that one. I think perhaps the average comfort is going down a little bit, but it certainly looks like a different kind of structure. Right, I'll turn you back to the kind of presentation. Okay, right. I'm I hope that was kind of insightful, and I wasn't quite surprised by what's going on there. And this can lead to a kind of classic expression of a dilemma. And it's often phrased in terms of money versus morality. So in the case of the economic relief issue, it can be about, there are certain principles. Yeah, there are certain principles that we feel we ought to do, perhaps respect for the other, perhaps it's about fairness, it's about giving people other voices. We might buy into these principles and say the decision taken by economic relief didn't quite capture it, but that's okay. But we could frame this as an issue between money versus morality. And it is unsurprising that these kind of conflicts kind of happen. And Michael Sandel wrote an excellent book about the kind of what happens when markets meet morality. But what I want to say to you is perhaps we're drawing the distinction a bit too clearly. We're perhaps making distinction too easily. That what's going on here in terms of kind of presenting it is that actually I'm introducing you to something about conflicting ethical intuitions or approach. The first one, and the way it was expressed by economic relief, that this was about principles. This is principles from which we believe in and we need to enact. In the second one, I emphasize consequences. Now, if you've done any philosophy in the past or read any, you'll see this is a classic tension between kind of principle-based views of ethics and consequentialist views. And what consequentialist views are, they're saying that to be ethical is to maximize X. And X is often expressed in terms of happiness, but it might be something about human flourishing or the commitment to the good. So that in the second scenario, we see a kind of conflict appearing. Now, there's been lots of ink spilt over the distinction between principle-based views and consequence-based views, and there's no agreement about which is perfect. But I think our approach is to say these are different lenses. There's different ways into ethics, and they kind of broaden our view. So when we reach a dilemma, when we feel our way through it, it is about seeing that what principles are at stake here, what consequences happen. As you can see, when we introduce the consequences, it changed kind of levels of confidence. It actually changed some of our decisions. Now, we could go into a real sort of deep discussion here, but I want to kind of move us kind of forward a bit. I also want to say that I've been emphasizing the notions of feeling our way through situations and how important emotions are in ethics. If you look at the work on moral psychology and the kind of neuroscience of ethics, we see that emotions are really interleaved with reason. And if we try to take ethics out of our kind of moral reasoning, we can't do it because they're intimately intertwined. And indeed, some have talked about specific moral emotions such as guilt or shame or pride. And part of our practices is learning about these emotions and seeing them flowing through organisations. Then there is the question of how we respond to emotions. And there are approaches to ethics which emphasise the fact that we need to recognise and respond to kind of needs between others. Sometimes ethics makes us think about people as abstract units, and sometimes we're enjoined to do that. There are rights holders, but actually ethics is about embodied people which may have needs. We have strong emotional bonds with them, and that ethics can be about recognising and ratifying that care. And finally, there's the approach to the decision. I kind of framed it as an individual, but often when we make decisions, perhaps in a kind of trustee board context, we're speaking on behalf of. Now, there's a stream of ethics, broadly understood as kind of relational ethics. Ethics is about our collective inquiry, and it becomes really important about who we're engaging with and whose voices we are hearing. Not speaking on behalf of, the voices we're hearing. And I think there was a lot of fallout from this decision, particularly over Stacey Dooley. And I was thinking whether it was important for actually someone like Stacey Dooley to be in the conversation and speak, have their voice kind of ratified and listened to as being part of the debate, as being part of that collective inquiry.